Now, this morning, we're going to be starting the third part, really, of men's fraternity. The first part, as you remember last fall, looking back and looking into how we became what we became, the kind of person we became. And we tried to unravel some of the knots of our past and some of the wounds that were inflicted on us. And then the last few weeks, we've been establishing that definition of manhood. Now we're going to begin to process that manhood into the life before us, principally with the woman in our life, with the children in our life, our sons, our daughters. We'll be talking about that. And then in the life stages of a man. That's how we'll be finishing up men's fraternity in the weeks that are still before us. Before we move on, though, from the Genesis mountain, and we talked about Adam 1 and Adam 2, I thought I'd share with you a story that was given to me that kind of gives a different perspective, kind of a counter perspective on all the things I've been sharing with you. The story goes like this. One day, Eve was in the Garden of Eden, and she called out to God. She said, "You know, God, I have a real problem." And God said to her, "Well, what is that?" And she said, "Well, I love the garden that you have for me. I love the beauty of it. It's magnificent. I love all the animals you've provided for me, but I'm just not happy." And God said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, I'm tired of eating apples and just hanging around. I'm lonely. I need someone." And God said, "Well, you know, I can solve that problem for you, Eve. I can create a man for you, but with one condition." And she said, "What's a man?" And God said, "Well, he's a creature that's going to be bigger than you are. He's hairy. He's stronger than you. He will like to hunt and fish and play games and kill things. And he will like fighting too. He won't be as talkative as you or as smart. In fact, he's going to need you desperately to help him think properly." And God said, "So what do you think?" And Eve said, "I think that's okay. I'll take him, but what's the one condition?" And God said, "Well, here's the condition. You know, the man that I'm going to create for you is going to be proud and self-admiring, so you'll have to let him believe that I created him first." And then God drew real close and said, "It'll be our little secret, woman to woman." Well, that's a little different picture on all that we've talked about, but it's a good one to start the morning with, isn't it? What I'd like to do is begin the first really of 3 sessions on a man and a woman, specifically a man and a wife. For you guys who are not married, this will be to help you get a perspective on marriage, especially you younger guys. You know, oftentimes there's never been really a moment where someone sat down with you and said, "Let's just talk about women," and get a little women speak, a women's vocabulary, a sense of perspective on where we're going with women and how we can live a lifetime successfully with women. Because let me tell you, one of the things, and the married guys know this, that you'll invest tons of energy and effort and will be the difference between a sense of success and failure in your life, or satisfaction or dissatisfaction, is how well you can live with a woman. Is that not true, married guys? And there are so many differences. In fact, sometimes it's helpful just to laugh at some of the differences. And Dave Berry gives us kind of a humorous kind of slant on just how different we are in this relationship between 2 individuals that he calls Roger and Elaine. And I'd like to read it. It's one of my favorite stories. He says, Roger and Elaine had been seeing each other regularly. And then one evening, as they were driving home after dating, a thought occurred to Elaine, and without really thinking, she says it aloud. "Roger, do you realize that as of today, we've been seeing each other for exactly 6 months?" And then there is silence in the car. To Elaine, it seems like a very loud silence. She thinks to herself, "Geez, I wonder if that bothered him, what I said. Maybe he's feeling confined by our relationship. Maybe he thinks I'm trying to push him into some kind of obligation that he doesn't want or isn't sure of." And Roger is thinking, 6 months. And Elaine is thinking, "But hey, I'm not so sure I want this kind of relationship either." Sometimes I wish I had a little more space so I'd have time to think about whether I really want to keep going the way we are, moving steadily towards, where are we going? And are we just going to keep seeing each other at this level of intimacy? And are we headed towards marriage, towards children, towards a life together? Am I ready for this level of commitment? Do I even know this person? And Roger is thinking, 6 months. I love this story. Let's see, 6 months ago, February, when we started going out, which was right after I had the car at the dealer's, which means, let me check the odometer. Whoa, I'm way overdue for an oil change. And Elaine is thinking, he's upset. I can see it on his face. Maybe he has sensed, even before I sensed it, that I was feeling some reservation. Yet I bet that's it. That's why he's so reluctant to say anything right now about his feelings. He's afraid of being rejected. And Roger is thinking, and I'm going to have them look at the transmission again, too. I don't care what that mechanic said. It's still not shifting right. And Elaine is thinking, see, he's angry. And I don't blame him. I'd be angry, too. I feel so guilty putting him through this because I can't help the way I feel. I'm just not sure. And Roger is thinking, they'll probably say it's only a 90-day warranty. And Elaine is thinking, maybe I'm just too idealistic, waiting for a knight to come riding up on his horse. Roger, Elaine says aloud. What, says Roger, startled. Please don't torture yourself like this, she says, her eyes beginning to brim with tears. Maybe I should never have, oh God, I feel so, what, Roger says. I'm such a fool, Elaine sobs. I know there's no knight. I really know that. It's silly. There's no knight and there's no horse. There's no horse, says Roger. You think I'm a fool, don't you, Elaine says. No, says Roger, glad to finally know the correct answer. It's just that. It's that I need some time, Elaine says. There's a 15-second pause while Roger, thinking as fast as he can, tries to come up with a safe response. Finally, he comes up with one he thinks might work. Yes, he says. Elaine, deeply moved, touches his hand. Oh, Roger, do you really feel that way, she says. What way, says Roger. That way about time, says Elaine. Oh, says Roger, yes. Elaine turns to face him and gazes deeply into his eyes, causing him to become very nervous about what she might say next. Thank you, Roger, she says. Thank you, says Roger. Then he takes her home and she lies on her bed, a conflicted, tortured soul, and weeps until dawn. Whereas when Roger gets back to his place, he opens a bag of Doritos, turns on the TV, and immediately begins deeply involved in a rerun of a tennis match between two Czechoslovakians he's never heard of. The next day, Elaine will call her closest friend, or perhaps two of them, and they will talk about this situation for 6 straight hours. In painstaking detail, they will analyze everything she said and everything he said, going over it time and time again, exploring every word, every expression, every gesture for nuances of meaning, considering every possible ramification. Then they will continue to discuss this subject off and on for weeks. Meanwhile, Roger, while playing racquetball one day with a mutual friend of his and Elaine's, will pause just before his serve and say, Norm, did Elaine ever own a horse? That's the way it is sometimes, isn't it, guys? Now that is the mammoth task we're facing. These incredible differences and how we understand those differences, and the fact that that person that looks different from you, has the longer hair, has the more fragile frame, it will be one of the greatest challenges of your life. And how well you master that challenge will determine to a large extent not only the way you feel about yourself as a man, but your sense of satisfaction or dissatisfaction, happiness or sadness every day. It's that critical. 2,000 years ago, a simple fisherman who had spent 3 years with Jesus Christ made a profound statement to men. It's a very simple statement. You know, he was kind of the first century John Gray. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. His name was the Apostle Peter, and he made this statement. I want you to look at it. It's a key verse in Scripture. 1 Peter 3:7. I want you to look at it because it's profound in its implications. He says, you husbands likewise live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker vessel, that is, she's not physically as strong as you are, since she is a woman. Now, let's just stop right there before we go any further. You husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. The Greek word there is literally according to knowledge. You need information. Don't guess at it. Load up with skill and info. Because she's a woman. Do you get it? She's not a man. And you need to live with her in that understanding way, and you need to grant her honor as a fellow heir in the grace of life. And if you don't, it not only inhibits your relationship with her, it will inhibit your relationship with God. Your prayers will be hindered. Now I want to draw three phrases out of that and just make a few observations here at the beginning because it's so important. First of all, on your outline, look there, the phrase in an understanding way in that verse. That speaks to insight and skill. It was nice for Bill to call Mark Kucharski from Poland up here today because a woman, if you've ever been to a foreign country, and I've been to Mark's country of Poland, if you've ever been to a foreign country, one of the most unnerving things about being in a foreign country is you don't speak the language. And so it creates all kinds of complications, and it requires for you to master certain amounts of basic language skills, or at least some working knowledge of the language to work your way around so you can interface with somebody from a foreign country. Did you know, for some of you guys today, you're going to go home and walk in to a house with a foreigner? And for some of you young guys, you're going to call up a foreigner and invite her out? And you're going to think that you speak the language, and it'll be the greatest mistake of your life. You don't speak the language. To do that, to approach somebody of the opposite sex and try to engage them thinking you know what you're doing is the greatest mistake a man can make. And Peter told us that. He said, live with your wives in an understanding way, i.e., according to knowledge, which means you've got to learn woman speak. You've got to learn what women feel. You've got to learn what women need, and it's all different than you, so it's totally disorienting. And then you've got to address them outside what you're thinking into what they're thinking, and you have to interpret as you go. That's why it's a skill to live with a woman in an understanding way. That's why it requires that you have insight and this skill. You're not guesswork. You can't do it by accident. You can't do it by instinct because your instinct will be wrong. I remember first time I was married, our very first Christmas, I was thinking what I could buy my wife for Christmas. And I went out and signed her up for a health club, 24-month membership to a health club. And so it's Christmas and we're opening stuff and she opens up this thing and it's a 24-month membership to a health club. She started to cry. I thought it was such a great gift. I mean, I was just a young 21-year-old. I thought that was such a good gift. Why did I think it was a good gift? Because I wanted to go to the health club. And I gave her what I like. You know what she did? She thought, I'm fat. And so that's what I experienced. I made 24 payments to that health club. She never went one time. Now, that was the beginning of my journey. I didn't know what I was doing. Now here we are, 32 years into marriage. And I have a whole different skill set. I mean, when Valentine's rolled around the other day, you know, I've already learned, don't go at the last minute. You know, I went days before, bought my card, and then I took about 30 minutes and went to a fast food place and got me a little drink and sat down and opened that card, and I sat there and thought, what are the things I can tell my wife that she needs to hear that's not natural for me to say? That's the question I've learned to ask myself. And after a while, it takes me a while, the computer has to boot up. But then I begin to think, man, she really means this to me and that to me, and I begin to write it down. And so I filled out the whole card. Now, that's totally different than going out at the last minute and buying a little card. A woman will still appreciate it. She opens it up. It's got a little nice saying that you picked out, and it's got, "Love, Robert." That means something to her. But if she opens up the card and the whole left side is filled out with, this is what you mean to me. This is what you've done for me. These are the things I could never live without. And they're specific and to the point. Now that's a skill. And that has tremendous benefits in the relationship. It's the same way whether you're coming home at the end of a day and you walk in and she's fixed a nice dinner for you or whatever. And in the old days, to me, it was dinner and then TV. But then the message of too many evenings like that is that you are an employee of the little company called the Lewis Residence. And that has payback. On the other hand, skill and knowledge understands, no, she's equal. She's a soulmate. And so to walk in and say, how can I help you? Or let me clean up after dinner or whatever. See, that's engaging a woman with skill and knowledge. And that's what the apostle is telling us right here from the beginning. Husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. That speaks to insight and skill. Secondly, grant her honor. That speaks to appreciation and value. The whole woman's movement is based on one giant cry. Do you value us? And it's a wise man who will speak into that every day with things that women value. They want to know that they're valued, that they're significant. The number one need of a woman is to know that she's significant. And if you'll remember that, then that will lead you to walk up to her every day, put your arm around her, and look into her eyes and say, honey, I love you. Because when you say, I love you, she knows that's not easy for you. And the fact that you would take the time to do that says, that means I'm valued. For you to do the little extras, like I mentioned, writing on a card rather than just signing a card. Doing something extravagant from time to time that just totally surprises her. All those things speak into what a woman is desperately wanting to know, and that is, I'm valued. For you young guys, for you to call a woman up for a date rather than have her call you says that you value her. For you to open the door for her says that you value her. For you to say, I want to take care of you, says that you value her. Those are the things that have to be repeated over and over again because she can never get enough of it. Just like you can never get enough admiration for your accomplishments. A woman can never get enough appreciation for her value. And Peter knows that. He's the John Gray of the first century. And he says, you need to speak to her value. Finally, notice the word fellow heir. That speaks to equality and worth. It says that she's a co-heir in the grace of life. That means another term is co-equal. She's equal. She may be different, but in God's eyes, she's equal. And when women don't feel equal, then they feel like they have to be the same as men. And that's a tragedy because then they lose their greatest createdness, and that is that they are female. And we don't want them to look like men and act like men. We want them to be the woman. We want the counterpart. And we want to do the kind of things that encourage that femininity while at the same time allowing that femininity to be fully free and equal in our eyes. And when they see that equality in the way we handle money with them or the way we care for them or the way we share things with them in an equal basis, it tells them that they are equal in very practical terms. She may be different, but it's our role to make them in a relationship feel of equal worth. Now, those three things Peter says to us right at the outset. Guys, listen, she's a woman. She's not like you. She's not a man. You're going to have to learn woman speak. You're going to have to learn skill. Live with your wives in an understanding way. You can't get enough information about women. And you younger guys, the more you know about women, the more you can speak into that foreign land and win. You know, for the next 3 weeks, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a simple kind of overview of the relationship and of marriage that I think you can take with you and refer back, I believe, the rest of your life. And if you stay within that pattern, you'll win in your relationship with a woman. Now, what we want to do this morning as a starting place is just look at marriage as an organization. I want to give you 3 models of marriage here today because, listen, look guys, every marriage is a business. It's a company. It's an organization, and it operates that way. And I want you to get a feel for how it operates and see that pretty much every marriage in this room is one of these 3 models. So let's look at them. Here's the first. I'm going to call it the top-down traditional marriage. And I've selected some passages from Scripture that kind of speak to this organizational model, though not every one of these passages are going to speak to marriage. But let's look here at Luke chapter 22, a statement that Jesus made to His disciples. He said to them, "The kings of the Gentiles lord it over those under them. And those who have authority over these people are called benefactors. But not so with you." Now, the word benefactor doesn't mean somebody who gives out benefits. In the first century, it was a title of a boss. And if I could kind of paraphrase, those who lord it over you are called the big dog, the boss man, the head guy. And he uses that position of authority to lord it over you. Now, that's a lot like a number of marriages look like today. This kind of model. Here's the way it would be on an organizational chart. I call it the top-down traditional. If it's a guy who thinks he's underneath God, it would be God, and then he's the husband, and he's positioned strategically on top of his wife. And that's the way he would draw it out in the Scripture. In this kind of arrangement, the husband's position is to be king. He's the king of the Gentiles. He's the king of his home. His leadership style is that of being a lord. The goal in his mind is personal benefits, and those benefits are primarily for himself. Everything there is for him. And that's the way things are arranged and the way things are organized. And the effects in the marriage is this: there's usually a winner and a loser. Unfortunately, many times it's the woman who loses. She loses her identity in that kind of relationship. She loses her sense of significance. She loses out on having a real voice because she gets intimidated by that bigger, hairier, meaner, opposite sex that sometimes makes her feel like she needs to cower in the corner. She loses out on self-respect. And it's unfortunate that years ago, this model became so prevalent, although it was pictured in the media as being these happy homes, but as women watched it on TV in the 60s and looked at their own lives, they felt less, even as they saw these fictional people on TV look more. They felt less. They didn't feel like they were going anywhere. I remember reading a statement by Irma Bombeck in an article where, even though she's a humorist, she was making a very pointed statement in this regard. Now, this is years back when the women's movement first was born, but the women in the 60s finally had enough. And this is the way Irma expressed it. She said this: "For 2 decades during the 50s and 60s, Ozzie and Harriet were the role models for every couple in the country. Harriet looked better cleaning her house than most of us looked at our weddings. She never lost her temper, gained weight, or spent more money than her husband made. It was the age of God, motherhood, flag, and apple pie. All you had to do to be a mother was put on an apron, and no one did it better than this TV primetime mother. Unfortunately, it was the not ready for primetime mothers who questioned it all in the late 1960s. They questioned the long days, the lack of fringe benefits, the run and fetch syndrome, feeling used and taken advantage of. It started out as a ripple of discontent, gathering momentum through the 1970s. By the 80s, the dissidents were a force to be dealt with. Whatever happened to Ozzie and Harriet? And she concludes, they disappeared beneath a tidal wave of reality. And that tidal wave of reality was what was called the top-down traditional model of marriage, with the man over the woman, feeling like I'm the benefactor, the boss. Now I want you to know, as a young guy who didn't grow up in the church and becoming a Christian in the 60s myself, guys, look at me at this, those of you who grew up in church. Over and over again in the 60s, as a young man, this model was told to me to be the biblical model. And I'm going to tell you, it's not. All right? It's not the biblical model. And so a call back that oftentimes I hear to go back to the traditional family, in so many women's mind, that's what it looks like. And they'll never go back to that. They'll fight that. Because that's not a place of being fulfilled as a woman. That is a place of being oppressed as a woman. But that's a very vibrant model, even in our day. But that's one of the models you can choose. Here's a second one, what I call, and this is kind of going to the opposite place, the 50-50 identical marriage. Verse that's often used for that is Galatians 3:28. We saw this in our discussion of theology back in Genesis, but here's the statement. There's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free man, there's neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So we're all the same. There is no leadership in a marriage. There